The Employee Retention Credit from the IRS is the last major COVID relief program. Claim up to $26,000 for each employee you had on payroll. This is Marty Stewart with Disaster Loan Advisors. The IRS tax refund is newfound money for your business. Let us help you navigate the ERC program with flexible options and working together. You can relax and have peace of mind that you're in good hands. Stay safe, stay compliant, and keep more of your refund. Take the next step and schedule a free ERC consultation call with us today.
Eligibility and criteria details for the Employee Retention Credit 2021. The Internal Revenue Service, IRS, released extensive guidance on the Employee Retention Credit, ERC, in August 2021, which provided helpful clarification on several issues previously associated with the credit. It's a little confusing for some people to figure out the eligibility criteria for the ERC, which is a refundable tax credit for keeping payroll throughout 2020 and 2021. This detailed description of the Employee Retention Credit eligibility criteria for 2021. What is the Employee Retention Credit? Employee retention credits can offset certain employment taxes paid by authorized firms after March 12, 2020, but before January 1, 2021. On Form 941 for the quarter in which the qualifying wages were paid, businesses estimated the total qualifying earnings and the associated COVID-19 Employee Retention Credit. However, it should be mentioned that in 2021, the rules will be changed. According to the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security (CARES) Act, employers who received Paycheck Protection Program (PPP) loans were not eligible for the ERC unless the loans were paid back before May 18, 2020. Later, this clause was abolished by the Taxpayer Certainty and Disaster Tax Relief Act of 2020, allowing anyone who received a PPP loan to qualify for the Employee Retention Credit. The excess was considered an overpayment and was returned to the employer if the credit amount exceeded the employer's share of those federal employment taxes. To calculate the employer's credit for the quarter ending June 30, 2020, wages paid over the period March 13, 2020 to March 31, 2020 met the Employee Retention Credit documented on the second quarter Form 941. As a result, the credit was permitted against the company's share of Social Security taxes, 6.2% rate, and railroad retirement tax on all earnings and wages paid to all employees for the quarter. However, earnings paid with the PPP loan do not count as creditable wages. Who is eligible for the Employee Retention Credit 2021? One of the following conditions, which must be met in the calendar quarter in which the company wants to use the credit, determines whether an employer qualifies for the ERC. Due to government orders, the employee has been forced to cut back on business hours or completely halt operations. The employee suffered a substantial drop in quarterly gross sales compared to 2019. 2020 has a 50% decrease in revenue compared to 2019. 2021 has a 20% decrease in revenue compared to 2019. The person has started a company or trade after February 15, 2020, generating yearly gross revenues of no more than $1 million. Are all employees eligible for the Employee Retention Credit? The credit is accessible to all qualifying employers of any size that paid their employees appropriate wages. If an employer didn't previously claim the ERC, they could do it retrospectively for the times that it was in the company. However, other criteria apply to firms with less than 100 workers and less than 500 employees for specific sections of 2020 and 2021. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act retrospectively ended the ERC on October 1, 2021, except for recovery startup businesses, which had time until December 31, 2021. You may, however, submit a revised Form 941X quarterly employment tax return for any period in which you were eligible but did not submit an ERC claim. The Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act established the ERTC, signed into law in March 2020, also known as the Employee Retention Credit, to incentivize companies to keep people on their payroll. In addition, Congress encouraged firms to continue paying their employees into 2020. Employee Retention Credit requirements. Following are the requirements of ERC for any employee. Employers can submit up to $5,000 per employee for 2020 and up to $7,000 per person for each qualifying quarter in 2021. A payroll tax credit under the ERC is available to qualifying employers to offset any federal employment taxes paid between March 13, 2020 and September 30th, 2021. Employers that experience a governmental order-related suspension of operations as a result of COVID-19 are also eligible, as are those who saw a considerable drop in gross revenues of at least 50% in 2020 and at least 20% in 2021 compared to 2019. Employee retention credit rules. You must meet several guidelines and conditions to claim the ERC. These consist of rules for attribution. Importantly, attribution guidelines are used to establish ERC eligibility. If members from a group of corporations, trades, or enterprises have attribution under ERC, these attribution requirements generally apply to them. As the attribution rules are relevant, each employer business is regarded as a single employer for the following purposes: identifying any trade or commercial operations the employer had that were wholly or partially halted due to COVID-19 government orders. They were determining if the employer's gross earnings fell significantly, figuring out if the business averaged more employees than the required minimum, which might otherwise restrict the ERC, calculating the maximum credit limit for each employee. To calculate ERC eligibility and the ERC credit amount, taxpayers who share ownership in many businesses must be cautious about applying the attribution criteria correctly. An eligible employer that wants to be subject to this duty must carefully examine the relevant governmental orders and how they affected ongoing company activities when the directives were in the company during the eligible quarter. Recovery startup business. As modified, the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 now has a new Section 3134. A recovery starting firm was granted an ERC under Section 3134, B2, for the third and fourth quarters of 2021. With a cap of $50,000 per calendar quarter and federal payroll taxes. A recovery startup business may be eligible for the ERC regardless of whether it meets the above-mentioned full or partial suspension of operations if the governmental order or significant decline in gross receipts criteria. However, taxpayers should be aware that complicated tax averaging laws and other regulations like employee wages may influence whether the employer satisfies the criteria for a recovery beginning firm. How to calculate employee retention credit. You must first determine the total eligible salaries for each quarter to qualify for the ERC, after which you must subtract those costs from your quarterly deposit. You can immediately apply for the credit if your 2020 taxes have already been filed while following all the tax rules. Employee Retention Credit Deadline. President Biden signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, into law on November 15, 2021. As a result, the Employee Retention Credit expiry date was changed from December 31, 2021 to September 30, 2021 for organizations or companies other than ARPA recovery startup businesses. Businesses can claim the Employee Retention Tax Credit, ERTC, retroactively. However, on April 15th of the year following the current calendar quarter, the 3-year statute of limitations for payroll taxes begins to run. Therefore, for ERTC claims from 2020, you would have until April 15, 2024, and for ERTC claims from 2021, you would have until April 15, 2025. Conclusion and summary of eligibility and criteria details for the Employee Retention Credit 2021. Employers who meet the requirements may profit from the ERC. The requirements include the COVID-19 governmental authority shutdown for any quarter in 2020 had to entirely or partially halt your business operations for that quarter, or your gross receipts for that quarter had to be less than 50% of your gross receipts for that same quarter in 2019, for a variety of tax reasons. Businesses that want to apply for the credit should be sure they meet the requirements to take advantage of the benefits.
As you can see, navigating the Employee Retention Credit Program is very complex and confusing to try to figure it out on your own. Even on the IRS ERC FAQ pages, it says, "This page is not current." There have been several years of updates and changes to this IRS tax credit already, including 4 congressional acts and 5 updated guidances from the IRS, totaling over 3,900 pages. Who has time to sift through all that information, let alone decipher some of the confusing language and rulings? In order to stay compliant with current IRS ERC rules and regulations, expert specialized help is highly recommended. Even if your business received an SBA PPP loan, you are still eligible for the ERC credit. If you think you may not qualify, it's worth a conversation to see if your business does. Let us assist you with a complete employee retention credit process, or if you might be stuck on filling out the IRS 941X forms correctly on your own. We are here to help. Stay safe, stay compliant, keep more of your refund. Email us at support@disasterloanadvisors.com or call us toll-free at 877-463-9777 extension 3. Or visit us on the web at www.disasterloanadvisors.com ERC for complete details on the Employee Retention Credit Program for your business.